The day my husband was buried felt like a nightmare unfolding in slow motion. The sky hung low and gray, and even the air seemed heavy, pressing on my chest as if trying to squeeze out what little breath I had left. I had been married to him for 32 years. We had built a home, raised a son, and survived countless storms together. Now, standing at the edge of his grave, I felt as though the ground had opened beneath me too. Family and neighbors gathered around, murmuring condolences. Hands reached out, resting briefly on my shoulder before slipping away. I heard the words, "I'm so sorry." He was a good man, but they sounded like a language I'd forgotten. All I could think of was how quiet the house would be when everyone left, how his chair at the table would remain empty, how the scent of his aftershave still lingered on his coat by the door. My son stood a few feet away, shoulders rigid, his gaze fixed on the coffin as if he were trying to bore a hole into it. He had always been a private boy, but in recent months his distance had grown into something colder, sharper. He didn't cry. He didn't even flinch when the priest said the final blessing. I tried to reach for his hand, but he stepped back, eyes flicking away. After the burial, we went back to the house. People brought casseroles and cakes, filling the kitchen with noise and clatter. I moved among them like a shadow, refilling cups of tea, nodding when spoken to. My son disappeared into his room and didn't come down for hours. When he finally emerged, his face was pale, his jaw clenched tight. He looked at me not with grief, but with something I couldn't name. That night, when the guests had left and the house settled into silence, I sat in the living room staring at a photo of my husband on our wedding day. My son entered without a word, standing in the doorway like a stranger. "What is it, darling?" I asked softly, my voice trembling. He stepped closer, eyes blazing. "Today or the next," he hissed, the words slicing through the quiet like a knife. For a second, I thought I had misheard him. The room tilted. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. "What did you say?" I whispered. He said nothing more, just turned and stalked off, leaving me frozen in my chair, the echo of his words hanging in the air like smoke. A chill ran down my spine, not just from grief, but from fear. The man I loved was gone, and the boy we had raised now felt like a stranger, perhaps even a threat. In that moment, I knew my life had shifted again, and not for the better. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows, felt amplified. I sat in my bedroom armchair clutching a pillow, replaying my son's words over and over. "Today or the next." They didn't sound like grief or despair. They sounded like a warning or a threat. My mind raced between memories of him as a boy and the man who had stood before me hours ago, his eyes hard and unreadable. By morning, the house was silent except for the ticking clock in the hall. My son's door remained closed. I paced the kitchen, making coffee I couldn't drink, toast I couldn't eat. I tried to reason with myself. Maybe he was overwhelmed. Maybe he didn't mean it. But the image of his blazing eyes wouldn't leave me. I walked through the rooms, noting little things: my husband's watch still on the dresser, the folded flag from his military service on the mantel. Each object felt like an anchor, yet none could keep me steady. I glanced at my son's closed door again. Should I knock? Should I leave? The tension inside me wound tighter. Finally, I tapped lightly. "Honey, can we talk?" No answer. I tried again, a little louder. The door opened a crack. His face appeared, pale and shadowed, like someone who hadn't slept either. "What do you want?" he asked flatly. I swallowed hard. "About last night, what you said. Did you mean it?" His eyes flicked away. "Forget it." I was angry. "That's not something you just say when you're angry," I whispered. Do you feel safe? Do you think I'm unsafe?" He shut the door without another word. My hands trembled. Something was wrong, deeper than grief. I pulled out my phone, scrolling to numbers of friends, of my pastor, of the police. But I didn't press call. Not yet. The day stretched long and thin. I kept the radio on low to drown the silence. At noon, I found myself sitting at the kitchen table with my husband's photo, speaking to it as if he were still there. "What's happening to our boy?" I whispered. "What am I supposed to do?" Tears I hadn't been able to shed at the funeral now came hot and fast. By evening, the tension had grown unbearable. I moved some essentials, a change of clothes, important documents, into a small overnight bag and set it by the door, just in case. As the sun went down, the house filled with shadows, and my son still hadn't emerged. I sat in the living room, the bag at my feet, my phone in my hand, waiting, listening, my heart pounding with a mix of dread and maternal hope. That night, as I watched the staircase in the dim light, I realized that my husband's death had opened a door to something I didn't yet understand, and I was standing at the threshold, unsure whether to step forward or run. The funeral had been a blur of black clothes, murmured condolences, and the scent of lilies. But the moment etched deepest in my memory wasn't the eulogy or the graveside prayers. It was my son's face, contorted with something darker than grief, leaning close to me and hissing, "Today or the next." In that instant, the church walls had seemed to tilt. Even now, days later, I couldn't shake the echo of his words. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cooling mug of tea in my hands. The steam rose and curled, vanishing before it reached my face, like my sense of safety had vanished. Images from that moment flickered through my mind, his clenched fists, the tremor in his jaw, the way people turned to look at us and then quickly away. What had they seen? What had they heard? I thought of all the times I had tried to reach him since his father's illness began. Late-night texts, invitations to dinner, notes slipped under his door, each met with silence or a curt reply. He had been pulling away for months, but I had told myself it was stress. We were all under stress. But now, the pattern looked more like a warning sign I'd ignored. I opened the drawer where my husband had kept his journal, a battered leather notebook, its pages filled with his neat script. He had written everything down: appointments, reflections, worries. In the last entries, his writing had grown shakier. I turned the pages, searching for anything about our son. There were hints he's angry about the will. He won't talk to me anymore, but nothing concrete. Still, my stomach tightened as if I'd swallowed stones. The phone buzzed, startling me. A text from my sister. "How are you holding up?" I started to type a reply, then deleted it. How could I explain? My son might want to harm me? I'm afraid in my own house? The words felt impossible. I stood, pacing, the wooden floor cold under my bare feet. Every creak sounded like a footstep behind me. My hand brushed the counter where my husband's watch still lay. I slid it onto my wrist, the metal warm from the sun streaming through the window. It was a small thing, but it made me feel closer to him and a little less alone. Through the doorway, I caught sight of my son's silhouette on the porch, phone to his ear. His back was to me, shoulders stiff. He laughed once, a sharp, humorless sound, then lowered his voice. I strained to hear but caught only fragments. "Tonight, she doesn't know," my pulse thundered. Who was he talking to? What was he planning? I stepped back before he could see me, pressing a hand to my mouth. My mind raced with scenarios, some rational, many not. But one truth had settled like ice in my veins. Whatever was happening with my son, I could no longer pretend it was just grief. Something deeper, more dangerous, had been unleashed, and I had to decide what to do before it was too late. Sleep became a stranger to me after that night. Every creak of the house felt like a warning, every shadow in the hallway like a threat. I began locking my bedroom door, a ritual that made me feel both safer and more trapped. But fear alone wouldn't protect me. I needed to understand what my son was planning. I needed proof of whatever darkness had taken root in him. The next morning, while he was out, I moved through the house quietly, almost guiltily, searching for clues. His room smelled faintly of aftershave and stale coffee. Drawers held only clothes and scattered receipts. But in the back of his closet, under a pile of old coats, I found a worn messenger bag. Inside were envelopes stuffed with cash, a cheap burner phone, and a folded paper with a name and address scrawled on it. My hands trembled as I unfolded it. The name was one I didn't recognize, but the address was only a few towns over. I snapped a photo of everything with my phone before putting it back exactly as I'd found it. My pulse hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just paranoia. He was hiding something serious. I pressed a hand against my mouth, breathing through my fingers to stay calm. What would my husband have done? He'd always been the one to see patterns, to plan ahead. That afternoon, I called my sister, keeping my voice light. "Do you still have that spare room?" I asked. She did. "Just thinking of visiting for a few days," I explained, though my heart was pounding. I didn't tell her about the bag, the phone, the whispered call on the porch. Not yet. If I spoke it aloud, it would become real. My son returned just as I hung up. He glanced at me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Who were you talking to?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Your aunt. She says hello." He didn't respond, just set his keys down and went to his room. The door shut with a soft but final click. I stood there in the hallway, feeling the tension hum between the walls like a live wire. That night, I kept my phone under my pillow, scrolling through the photo of the address again and again. I looked it up online, but found nothing more than a nondescript house on a quiet street. My mind spun with possibilities. Was it a friend? An accomplice? Something worse? Each theory left me colder than the last. As the house fell silent, I wrote everything down: the date, the time of his call, what I had found in the bag. It felt almost like a confession or a shield. If something happened to me, someone would know where to start. The pen moved across the paper with a shaky determination. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a woman preparing for a storm she couldn't yet name, gathering pieces of a puzzle that might save her life. By the third day of watching and waiting, my nerves were frayed like old rope. Every exchange with my son had become a performance. I spoke softly, smiled at the right moments, but inside my stomach was a knot of ice. I could feel the tension in him growing too. His movements were sharper, his tone clipped. Something was building between us, a pressure that would not stay hidden forever. That evening, rain lashed against the windows and thunder rolled low and heavy over the house. I stood at the kitchen sink, staring at the dark glass, when I heard him come in. His shoes squelched on the tile. He'd been outside somewhere, late again. He tossed his jacket over a chair and stared at me. The way he looked at me made the hair on my arms rise. No warmth, only calculation. "We need to talk," he said flatly. His voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. I wiped my hands on a towel, heart hammering. "About what?" He took a step closer. "Stop snooping in my things." My throat went dry. "I don't know what you mean." "Don't lie to me," he snapped, louder now. "I know you've been in my room. Stay out of it if you know what's good for you." For a moment, the kitchen felt too small, the air too thin. I clutched the counter to keep from trembling. "I'm worried about you," I said quietly. "That's all." He laughed once, a harsh sound. "Worried? You should be. You're next, remember." The words hung between us like a blade. My vision blurred with sudden heat behind my eyes. There it was, spoken plainly. Not a misunderstanding, not grief talking, an actual threat. My son, the boy I'd once held through fevers and nightmares, now glaring at me like a stranger. I backed toward the hallway slowly, keeping my voice calm. "I think we both need some space." His jaw flexed. For a heartbeat, I thought he might lunge at me. Instead, he snatched his jacket, stormed out the back door, and vanished into the storm. The slam of the door echoed through the house long after he was gone. My legs gave out and I slid down against the wall, pressing a hand over my mouth to muffle a sob. The kitchen light flickered with the storm outside. It was no longer a question of suspicion or evidence. It was survival. Whatever had taken hold of my son had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. I stayed there until the rain softened to a mist, then forced myself up. My fingers shook as I reached for the phone. It was time to stop pretending this would resolve on its own. Whatever love or loyalty I still felt had to take second place to staying alive. I began to dial a number, unsure if it would be the police, my sister, or someone else, but knowing I couldn't face another night alone in this house without help. The storm lasted all night, rattling the windows like a warning. I barely slept, lying awake with the phone clutched in my hand and the glow of the screen illuminating the ceiling. Each creak of the old house made me sit upright, listening for footsteps. But dawn came quietly, a pale light filtering through the curtains, and with it a strange clarity. I could not live like this any longer, afraid of my own son. I moved through the house on tiptoe, gathering what little evidence I had. Receipts stuffed into drawers, odd bottles hidden under his bed, a notebook of names I didn't recognize. Each item I placed into a plain envelope, my fingers trembling less with every new piece. It felt like building a raft while still adrift at sea, small pieces of hope against a rising tide. At breakfast, I made coffee as though nothing had happened. My son came in late, eyes shadowed, shoulders tense. He didn't look at me, just grabbed a mug and drank. The silence between us was a living thing. I watched his hands, the twitch of his jaw, the way he wouldn't meet my gaze. I thought about all the years I'd given him, every sacrifice, every sleepless night, and wondered how we had arrived here. When he finally left for the day, slamming the door behind him, I sat at the table staring at the steam rising from my cup. This was my moment. Fear had ruled me long enough. I took out my phone and called my sister. My voice shook at first, then steadied as I told her everything, the threat, the lies, the evidence I'd found. She listened without interrupting, only her quiet breathing on the other end. "You can't stay there another night," she said firmly. "Come here. Bring the envelope. We'll go to the police together." Her words were a lifeline. For the first time in days, I exhaled fully, my chest loosening. "I'm scared," I admitted. "I know," she replied. "But you're not alone." I packed a small bag quickly, essentials only. Each drawer I closed felt like closing a chapter of my life. Before leaving, I walked through the living room, pausing at old photos on the mantel, my husband smiling, our son as a boy between us. My throat tightened, but no tears came. I had cried enough. Locking the door behind me, I stepped out into the cool morning air. The sky was still heavy with clouds, but a pale stripe of sunlight broke through on the horizon. I gripped the envelope and my bag, each step toward the car feeling heavier and lighter at once. I was leaving behind not just a house, but the illusion that love alone could keep me safe. As I started the engine, I glanced at the rearview mirror. For a moment, I thought I saw movement at an upstairs window, a shadow behind the curtain. My heart skipped, but I forced myself to drive away. Whatever came next, I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. I drove for 2 hours straight, my knuckles white against the steering wheel, the envelope of evidence on the passenger seat like a silent passenger. Every mile that passed put a little more distance between me and the house, but the weight in my chest didn't lift. It wasn't just fear anymore, it was grief for the life I thought I had, for the son I thought I knew. When I reached my sister's house, she was already at the door. She pulled me into a tight hug before I could even set my bag down. The smell of her familiar perfume, the softness of her sweater, cracked the dam inside me. For a moment, I let myself cry, shoulders shaking, until she guided me inside. "You're safe now," she said, and for the first time, I almost believed it. We sat at her kitchen table with cups of tea steaming between us, while I went through the contents of the envelope piece by piece. Receipts, photos, phone screenshots, scribbled notes. Each item made my sister's face tighten a little more. "This is serious," she murmured. "We're taking it all to the police today. You've done the right thing." My hands shook as I spread the evidence out. "What if they don't believe me?" I whispered. "What if he comes here?" She reached across the table, squeezing my fingers. "Then we'll still be here together. And you'll have told the truth. That's more powerful than you think." Her calm steadiness steadied me. I remembered how, as children, she had been the brave one, standing up for me in playground fights, sneaking me out of the house during our father's rages. Decades had passed, but the way she anchored me had not changed. We made copies of everything, sliding them into a new folder. My sister called the local police station to explain the situation, and they told us to come in that afternoon. As she spoke to the officer, I stared out the window at her garden, the neat rows of flowers, the wind chimes swaying gently. Normal life, humming along somewhere beyond my fear. I imagined my son at work or wherever he'd gone. Did he know I'd left? Was he already looking for me? My stomach clenched at the thought, but I took a deep breath. This was the right thing to do. This was the only thing left to do. Before we left for the station, my sister handed me a small silver locket, our mother's. "For courage," she said simply. I clasped it around my neck, feeling its cool weight against my skin. "Thank you," I whispered. We walked out together to her car, the folder of evidence between us. The afternoon sky was overcast, but not threatening, a softer gray than the storm clouds I'd left behind. As the engine started, my sister glanced at me and said, "Ready?" I nodded. My voice still trembled, but the decision inside me was firm. "Let's go." The police station sat on the edge of town, a squat brick building with a faded blue sign. As my sister parked, my heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack. The folder of evidence lay in my lap, heavier than any suitcase I had ever carried. This was it, the moment when everything would change. Inside, the station smelled of paper, coffee, and a hint of disinfectant. Officers moved briskly from desk to desk, the hum of radios filling the air. A young officer behind the counter looked up as we approached. "How can I help you?" he asked, his voice calm but alert. My sister spoke first, explaining that we had called earlier. I could barely breathe, but when the officer's eyes met mine, something inside me steadied. "I need to report a crime," I said, my voice low but clear. "I believe my life is in danger." He led us to a small interview room with plain walls and a single table. As we sat, I laid out the contents of the folder one by one: receipts, photos, messages, notes, like a grim mosaic of betrayal. The officer listened intently, taking notes, occasionally asking a clarifying question, but never interrupting my flow. With each piece of evidence, I felt the story spilling out. My husband's sudden death, my son's growing hostility, the threats that had escalated until they were no longer words, but promises. My hands trembled as I spoke, but my voice didn't break. Not this time. When I finished, the officer closed his notebook. "We take threats like this very seriously," he said. "We'll open an immediate investigation. In the meantime, we'll arrange for your safety. Do you have somewhere else you can stay?" "I'm at my sister's," I replied. "But he knows where she lives." He nodded thoughtfully. "We can help you with emergency housing and put a watch on your son until we have more information. You're not alone in this." Those words, "you're not alone," landed like a lifeline. For months, maybe years, I had been shrinking under the weight of my son's manipulation and my own guilt. Now, sitting in a room of plain walls and buzzing fluorescent lights, I felt a flicker of hope. Another officer entered, older and graver. He introduced himself as Detective Harris and asked a few more detailed questions. "Your husband's death," he said gently, "will need to review the records. If anything was overlooked, we'll find it." A lump rose in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. As we stood to leave, the young officer handed me a card with a direct number. "Call us if you see him, if he contacts you, if anything feels off. Day or night." I tucked it into my pocket, feeling its edges against my fingertips like a small shield. Outside, the sky had brightened a little, pale sunlight breaking through the gray. My sister squeezed my shoulder as we walked to the car. "You were brave in there," she said softly. "I had to be," I replied, my voice steadier now. For him, for me, for the truth. Back at my sister's home, the air felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. The card from the police was still in my pocket, its edges digging into my palm as I paced the living room. My sister urged me to sit, but I couldn't. I felt as though every movement, every sound outside, might be a threat. I began combing through the copies of documents the police had kept, spreading out everything I had left on the coffee table. The photos of my husband, the bank statements, the cryptic text messages from my son, all of it formed a chilling puzzle. For the first time, I saw the full picture: the financial transactions my husband had questioned before his death, the sudden change in my son's demeanor, and a shadowy name that kept appearing on the records. My granddaughter peeked into the room, her eyes wide. She had been quiet since we left the station, but now she stepped closer. "Grandma," she whispered, "I heard something." Her small hands twisted nervously. "Mom was on the phone last night. She said something about finishing what they started and no loose ends." The words hit me like ice water. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked, kneeling to her level, trying to keep my voice steady. She repeated fragments, snatches of a conversation that linked my daughter-in-law directly to my husband's death and the threats against me. My stomach churned. The puzzle wasn't just my son's anger. It was bigger, darker, and far more deliberate. I recorded everything my granddaughter said on my phone, my hands trembling as I held it out to her. My sister watched silently, her face pale. When the girl finished, she climbed into my lap, trembling. "I'm scared, Grandma," she whispered. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling her heartbeat against mine. "You're safe," I said softly, though I wasn't sure it was true. "You're with me." I called Detective Harris immediately, relaying the new information in a low, urgent voice. He listened, his tone sharpening as I spoke. "Keep her with you," he instructed. "Do not confront anyone. We'll move quickly." After I hung up, the room felt both smaller and heavier. My sister closed the curtains and locked the doors. "This isn't just about you anymore," she murmured. "This is about all of you." I nodded, my jaw set. My granddaughter's revelation had cracked the story wide open. The grief of losing my husband shifted into something fiercer, a need for justice, not just survival. The police now had enough to act, but we had to stay hidden, stay smart until they did. As night fell, I held my granddaughter close, whispering a promise I intended to keep. "We're going to be okay. They won't hurt us again." Outside, the wind rattled the windows like a warning, but inside, for the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of resolve instead of fear. The following morning, the knock at my sister's door was soft but deliberate. My heart leapt into my throat until I heard the calm voice of Detective Harris identifying himself. My sister opened the door cautiously, and two plainclothes officers stepped inside, their eyes scanning the room before settling on me and my granddaughter. "We've verified your information," Harris said quietly, setting his briefcase on the table. "We believe we have enough evidence to move on your son and his wife. But we'll need your cooperation to make sure you and the child are safe." I felt my knees weaken. "Safe?" I repeated, glancing at my granddaughter. Are they coming here?" "Not yet," Harris replied. "They think you're still at home. We're setting up surveillance and a sting operation. But we need to move you both to a secure location before we act." My sister rubbed my back as I sank into a chair. The room buzzed with quiet urgency as the officers unpacked a small recording device and a stack of papers. "We're going to have you sign a statement," Harris continued. "Everything your granddaughter told you, everything you've documented, will be included. Then we'll get you both out of here under protective custody." I took the pen with trembling fingers. As I signed, my mind flickered back to my husband's smile, to our quiet mornings together before everything unraveled. This was for him. This was for the girl sitting beside me, clutching her stuffed rabbit. The officers fitted a discreet microphone into my phone case, explaining how it could record any incoming threats or calls. "You won't have to confront them," Harris assured me. "We're going to handle this." Once the paperwork was complete, my sister packed a small bag for my granddaughter and me. The girl stayed close, her eyes flicking nervously to the officers. "Are they going to catch them?" she whispered. "Yes," I said, meeting her gaze. My voice felt steadier than it had in days. "They're going to catch them." Outside, an unmarked car waited at the curb. The autumn air smelled damp and sharp as we stepped out, flanked by the two officers. My sister hugged me tightly. "Call me when you can," she murmured. "You're stronger than you know." As the car pulled away, I watched her small house recede in the rearview mirror. Harris sat in the front seat, speaking quietly into his radio, while the other officer offered my granddaughter a reassuring smile. For the first time, I allowed myself a tiny exhale of hope. The police had a plan. We were no longer running blind. And as we drove toward the unknown, I felt the faintest spark of something that had seemed impossible for weeks: relief. That evening, Detective Harris returned with news that made my stomach twist. The operation was set for dawn. "We'll execute the warrant first thing tomorrow," he said, "and you'll be able to watch from a secure feed. It's your choice, but it might give you closure." Sleep eluded me. I lay awake in the small safe house bed, listening to my granddaughter's soft breathing and the distant hum of traffic. Memories of my husband flooded me, his laughter, his warmth, and then the betrayal that had ripped through our family. My son's words echoed in my head, "Today or the next." Tomorrow, that would end. When morning came, the officers ushered us into a small monitoring room. A large screen displayed a live feed of our former home. Police vehicles waited quietly out of sight, officers poised for the signal. I gripped the edge of the table so hard my knuckles whitened. My granddaughter sat on my lap, her eyes wide and solemn. Harris's voice came through a radio. Team 1, move in. On screen, the front door burst open. Plainclothes officers surged inside, their commands crisp and echoing. My daughter-in-law's scream pierced the feed, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps. Seconds later, 2 officers led my son into view, his hands cuffed behind his back. He looked thinner, angrier, his eyes darting wildly. "Where is she?" he shouted. "Where is she?" I flinched, pressing my granddaughter closer. The officer in the monitoring room reached out, lowering the volume slightly. Harris stepped into view on the screen, his badge glinting. "You're under arrest for conspiracy and attempted harm," he said. "You have the right to remain silent." My daughter-in-law was next, dragged from the hallway, her hair disheveled, still shouting protests. The sight of them both, restrained and powerless, sent a shudder through me. Relief and grief tangled in my chest like a knot. The feed cut to a quieter image, the evidence being collected, officers moving through rooms I once decorated with love. Toys, photos, and memories blurred together as strangers cataloged my life. Harris turned from the screen to face me. "It's over," he said softly. "They won't be able to hurt you or your granddaughter now." Tears welled up, spilling down my cheeks as my granddaughter tucked her head under my chin. "Are we safe now?" she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart," I murmured, finally believing the words. "We're safe." In that small, windowless room, surrounded by officers, I felt something lift from my shoulders, a burden I'd carried for too long. The man I had raised was gone, but the little girl in my arms still had a chance at a different life. And so did I. A week after the arrests, the silence of the safe house felt different. The constant edge of fear was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar stillness. My granddaughter had begun to smile again, small flickers of childhood creeping back into her eyes. She drew pictures at the table while I sipped tea, trying to remember what normal life had once been. Detective Harris visited once more, this time without a folder or a radio. "I just wanted to check on you both," he said, his tone gentle. "The court has denied bail. They'll be in custody until trial. You're safe to start over." Start over. The words sat heavily between us. I had spent so long surviving that I hadn't thought about what came next. The house was still sealed as evidence. Our possessions would be returned someday, but the memories embedded in those walls were gone. I wasn't sure I wanted them back. That evening, I took my granddaughter for a walk in a nearby park. The air smelled of cut grass and warm earth. Children laughed on swings. For a moment, I let myself breathe it in, feeling the weight ease from my chest. She clutched my hand, looking up at me. "Grandma," she said softly, "are we going to live here now?" I knelt down to her level. "We can live anywhere we want," I said. "We're free now." Her eyes lit up with a cautious hope, as if she was testing the word free on her tongue. The following days were filled with small acts of reclaiming life, registering her for school, finding a modest apartment, cooking our own meals without checking the locks every few minutes. Each ordinary moment felt extraordinary. One afternoon, a package arrived at the safe house. Inside was a small framed photo, my husband holding our son as a baby. Harris had enclosed a note, "For when you're ready. Not all memories have to be lost." I sat on the edge of the bed, tears streaming down my face, until my granddaughter climbed up and hugged me. "It's okay to remember," she whispered. I realized then that closure wasn't a single moment of justice served, but a series of choices, choosing to protect her, choosing to survive, choosing to build a future that wasn't defined by betrayal. On our first night in the new apartment, I tucked her into bed and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. "We made it," I whispered to myself. My husband's shadow would always linger, but so would my strength. I wasn't the same woman who once flinched at her son's voice. I closed the curtains, turned off the light, and joined my granddaughter under the covers. As she drifted to sleep, I felt something warm unfurl inside me. Tomorrow would still bring challenges, but it would also bring possibility. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough.